How are multi-club models affecting the league, and what could they mean for the future of historic French clubs? This is the Ligue and Lowdown, and coming up in today's episode I'll be speaking to French football journalist Matt Spiro to find out more. Fans of FC Nantes furiously share their opinions on the club's current situation, and why Strasbourg fans should be worried about their club's future. But before we get into all that, it's worth quickly breaking down what we mean by multi-club ownership and why it's becoming such a big talking point in Ligue 1. In simple terms, it's when one ownership group controls multiple clubs across different countries, sharing recruitment networks, data and often players between them. Strasbourg are one of the clearest examples of this shift in France under Blueco, with the model bringing a clear rise in domestic and European ambition. But it's not all straightforward, and it raises bigger questions about what this means for historic French clubs like Nantes, who are still operating under a much more traditional ownership model. To explore this in more detail, I spoke to French football journalist Matt Spiro. Hi Matt, thanks for joining me.
That's a pleasure,
How
Leo.
are you doing?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Exciting times with the end of the season coming up. So, all good. I'm going to see Lens against PSG tonight, so I'm looking forward to that.
Exciting. Firstly, when you look at Ligue 1, would you say it feels like there's an increasing divide between clubs with more of a major financial backing, like Strasbourg, and then the more traditional clubs like Nantes?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, the financial landscape has changed significantly in the last few years because of the collapse of the television revenues. So French clubs, they rely primarily on two revenue streams, if you like. One is player sales and the other is television revenues. And because the domestic deal collapsed and it's a complex situation, but the money they're getting is pretty minimal. Basically, you're either great at developing and selling players, or you need some external backing, like you say, like Strasbourg have got with their multi-club model through Blueco.
So it's sort of the two different directions modern football can sort of go in. You've got the more historic clubs with the local ownership, and then you've got the big companies that have come in and bought some of these clubs in France, and they're sort of maybe looking at more of a business sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where the difficulty lies as far as the supporters are concerned, and the identity of these football clubs, because I think a lot of Strasbourg fans are really happy to see some exciting young talent joining the club that Strasbourg have been able to invest in thanks to their partnership with Blueco and their arrangement with Chelsea. But at the same time, while they're excited, they got to the semi-finals of the French Cup, the semi-finals of the Europa Conference League, and they've secured some big results as well in Ligue 1, even if they're drifting towards mid-table now. But at the same time, they know that their club will not be allowed to go beyond a certain level, because ultimately they are the little brother of Chelsea. So as soon as they get a player who is, exceptional, he'll be off to Chelsea or perhaps another football club. But Blueco sees Strasbourg, even if they say, or certainly Mark Keller, the president, says that they're equal and there's no hierarchy. I think it's pretty obvious, when you see, for example, Liam Rossigna, the coach, leaving mid-season to join Chelsea. It's pretty obvious that Strasbourg is subservient to Chelsea. So for the supporters, it's hard, because a supporter wants to be able to dream, wants to be able to believe that one day their club could be the top dogs. And ultimately, the multi-club ownership model kind of prevents fans from having that dream.
So now sort of moving towards Nantes, they're a historic club. They've won Ligue 1 multiple times. They've even been to the semi-final of the Champions League. But now they've been relegated to Ligue 2 before the end of the season.
Well, it's difficult. There's no question. It's increasingly difficult for clubs who don't have external backing to thrive in Ligue 1. I think 10 years ago, people looked at Nantes and thought, come on, they've got to get the old identity back, because Nantes were a club that was famed for playing attractive football. They invented what in France is called le jeu à la Nantaise, which many people say was a precursor to Barcelona's tiki-taka, just a really quick form of passing football and kind of total, not necessarily total football, but certainly movement and players interchanging positions. And I think people understand now that that's no longer realistic as far as Nantes are concerned. But that doesn't mean they can't be organised and do things well. Under Kita, I think they've had 23 different managers in 18 years or so. They've had no stability, no coherence in terms of the managers that they've brought in.
And I think a problem that some of the Nantes fans have had this season is how big of a character Valdemar Kita can be within the club.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're being presided by Valdemar Kita for many, many years. His son, Franck Kita, was the sporting director. He's now the president, and Valdemar is the owner. And Valdemar Kita has been very unpopular for a very long time at Nantes. He will say, and he does say, and he's justified in saying that he defends his management, but he also says, I've put a lot of my own personal money into the football club. And this is true. And without that, Nantes would be in bigger trouble. But without that as well, they would have a different person in charge, and maybe they would be run in a better way. So you could say it's a bit of a vicious circle. But I think when you've got somebody at the top of your football club who refuses to have any sort of constructive dialogue, who places the blame on everybody but himself, and he is despised by a lot of the fan base, and this is a club that is among the most supported in France. I just think it's impossible to have the sort of environment you need for a club to flourish.
So I had the opportunity to sort of go to the beaujoire and speak to some Nantes fans sort of about like all of these issues.
Disastrous, because they've been there for a very long time. They've had a lot of money, but they don't have the competence. They struggle to delegate, and little by little, they are dragging the club down.
A lot of them seem frustrated with Kita, as you'd imagine, and the fact that he hasn't sold the club, even though he's had opportunities and he sort of decided not to. What would you say to the owner if you had 10 seconds?
Sell the club to someone who works well and work with the fans.
Many of them have claimed that they'd much rather be in a multi-club style model similar to Strasbourg than relegated to Ligue 2.
I think the club is falling behind because of financial resources. It's also because of the people running the club. Like I said before, there are clubs with fewer financial resources such as Angers, Brest or Lorient. But it's more a question of people and competence.
This time of the season, I can understand that sentiment. I do think it would be sad to see a club of Nantes standing historically, a club that's won 8 league titles, becoming, a sort of secondary club in another multi-club ownership model. But to be honest, I think Nantes could and should be performing much better as they are. I think that their priority should be to get their house in order. They're a football club that, if they do get things right, can absolutely bounce back up. It's not going to be easy at all, and in their current state, I don't think they will bounce back up. But look, it's hard. You can really understand the frustration of these Nantes fans who desperately want a new owner. They want to see the club moving in a new direction, and I think if you're giving them the choice between Kita carrying on in this very sort of chaotic and incoherent fashion, or becoming part of a multi-club model where you're going to have lots of very talented young players perhaps coming in, then I can understand why they're opting for the latter.
That's all for this episode of the Ligue and Lowdown. A huge thank you to Matt Spiro for his insight and to the Nantes supporters who shared their views on the current situation at the club. What's clear from everything we've heard is that multi-club ownership is starting to reshape parts of French football, but not without raising big questions about identity, stability and what it means for historic clubs like Nantes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.